Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. This is episode number 360 of We Are Podcast. And by the way, it's way more than that. We restarted the numbering a few years ago, so because we stopped counting. But we've done way more episodes than 360, but this is episode number 360. It is the critical need for diversity in decision making. It's a compilation with some legends and leaders that I feel are very, very important. We have Maribel Lara from VaynerX. We have Daniel Mangena, Dan Illick, and Kiri Marie Moore. All huge leaders in their own right, in their own space. We talk about diversity and inclusion in leadership and in different organizations. We cover the role of leadership in promoting diversity. We talk about innovation and change through diverse experiences and collaborative efforts for societal change. Now, We Are Podcast is all about using your voice to create change. And a lot of these conversations are hard to hear conversations, especially the ones around diversity. And as people who care about topics that are really important to what we believe in, I believe diversity is a really important one, and I believe you should also. And here is an episode where I hope it gives you the permission to talk about some of the elephants in the room when it comes to your industry on your podcast, so you can be the voice for change. All right, let's learn.
You can't find your voice if you don't use it. This is We Are Podcast, formerly called Should I Start a Podcast? A podcast for podcasters who want a podcast that grows their business and brand. How many times can we say podcast in a sentence? Here's your host, Ronsley. He has interviewed more than 1,500 people, has been listened to over 5 million times in 133 countries. He has helped create over 1,100 podcasts for businesses, brands, and personalities. He's been doing this for more than a decade. Get ready to take notes. Enjoy the show.
What matters to you?
I believe strongly that organizations would be in a better place if there were more women at the table, right? We don't even have women at the table at a senior level, let alone like a CEO. And that's for everything, right? Across the board.
Yeah.
If you don't have people who come from a variety of different experiences or bring different perspectives to the table, then you're really just talking to yourself.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's easy to bring people on. It is easy, as difficult as people try to say that we just can't find any. But you're also looking for somebody that's had the same trajectory of everybody else you've got at the table. But if you're really reflecting, what you're trying to do is change the people at the table. So you also have to consider other trajectories.
Yes.
And you really need to think about capacity to succeed, not necessarily like there are people who have the capacity to succeed that have never been given the opportunity. And we need to do that at a variety of levels, not just at the top.
Sure.
Right? We'll have the greatest impact when we reflect that more so on top. But the other thing is like, how are you setting those individuals up for success? Right? I have stayed as long as I have. I've been in the VaynerX world now for over 9 years. And I've seen people come and go, right, who look like me, who come from similar communities. Why do I stay? Because no place is perfect.
Yeah.
I do not exist in a bubble of thinking that there is a perfect place. I stay here because even though we too have our flaws, and I would love to see more diversity, I see the effort. But I prefer to stay at the place that I know is trying to make progress and is making concerted effort, whose intentions are in the right place.
Yeah.
And it's working also really hard to have the actions follow up with that intention. So I want to see more of that representation. I've gotten to the point in my career where like there is a common thread. I wanted the initial stages of my career were in higher education.
Yeah.
Why did I choose to work at colleges and universities? Because I struggled not having seen people that looked like me because I felt like I couldn't open up to anyone because they wouldn't understand.
It's important to be brought to the table because that perspective is important, right?
There's no progress in continuing to do the same thing. It is the definition of madness.
It is.
right? So how else are you going to have a different conversation?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and, I think focused primarily on marginalized communities or identities, but even my coming into the advertising world, right? I was a really hard sell. Advertising traditionally is people come out of college having studied business or advertising, they go into this machine and they work their way up the ladder. I was 32 years old. I went back for an MBA, but I worked in the nonprofit and education sector. I never worked in traditional marketing. I had this pipe dream of a thing called social media marketing that nobody was even talking about. There were very few agencies, right?
Yeah.
This was the same time that Gary founded VaynerMedia.
Yeah.
So the same disbelief and what the hell is that was what I was facing when I was getting my MBA and saying this was what I wanted to do. But I saw the opportunity to do something new, right? I respected VaynerMedia because it was the first place that I interviewed that they thought the fact that I didn't come from advertising was great.
Wow.
There were folks working here who were stand-up comedians.
Yeah.
They came from so many good places. We had folks in senior creative roles that were creative because they were acting, they were doing comedy. Right? They came at it from a very different perspective. Those folks never would have made it into a traditional agency. You know what? They have a lot of traditional agency jobs now, but Gary created that. Right? And so just the fact that this place was just wow, you worked in higher ed, you worked with college age students at the time, you were a community management shop. The vast majority of the staff here was 22, 23, 24 years old. They were you're going to be great managing these people. And I was oh my God, you get it. And I didn't have to explain it to you.
Yes.
Right. So this is a place that's always been wow, that's pretty cool.
Yes.
How do we bring that thinking in here?
Yes.
So many organizations would benefit from that. But again, we don't give people a chance because as much as we say we're hiring for diversity, no, you're hiring for people who meet the same criteria you've always hired against, but have a different last name, or you can look at them and be they're a little different.
Hey, it's Mick Hawes, host of The Toolshed. I love making my podcast, and that's primarily because Ronsley has helped me avoid a whole bunch of really basic mistakes that would have cost me a whole bunch of time, money, and energy. And Rons has compiled a list of these mistakes and how to avoid them, which is really a steal. You can get your copy where I downloaded mine at mistakes.wearepodcast.com. That is mistakes.wearepodcast.com. We Are Podcast. You can't find your voice if you don't use it.
How can we get better to open up those conversations and be okay with someone disagreeing with our viewpoint?
I talk a lot about disruptive leadership right now, and I feel that as leaders, that we have to be willing to stand for our non-negotiables, whatever that is, right? And people are looking for people to stand strong in a world that it's not cool to stand strong. It is not good sometimes to be looking different and to be out there. And I can tell you it is working very much in my world where there are so much more people who are respecting me because I'm willing to stand up for some of the things and to speak with such honesty and rawness and realness in a place where I could have the opportunity to not look like that and to be quiet or to just say what everyone else wants me to say out there to make everyone feel comfortable. So I think there's that side of it, you as a personal. Then it's us as a collective. We have to be willing to then open our table up and invite people to that and start leading that conversation. But here's the caveat to it, and I think is the tricky piece and why more don't do it. I think there's a real willingness right now to go, yeah, we need different people at the table where we can facilitate that conversation, because otherwise you get people with getting their backs up, you get people misunderstood, you're not hearing me, you're not even listening, you get people dominating the conversation.
And people just screaming louder than the other person, and it becomes this
Correct.
screaming. You spend a lot of time with elders in these indigenous cultures and learning how leaders make important decisions, what are the key learnings for us to take into our lives to be able to do it ourselves?
We have to be ready to get curious that maybe there's something I don't know. Maybe it's a different lens in which they ask questions or think through. And we have to listen more in that way. But we also have to be able to be willing to ask questions, because the power has been that I've been able to ask really great questions to be able to get the insights and learnings that I have from across the globe. And that is in the moment. You have to know when to be quiet. You have to know when to step up. I remember I was at the table with one of the most amazing moments with former presidents of countries and nations, and it was closed doors. And I was in there and we were talking about future, like forward leadership, and how we didn't like where leadership was going, what it looked like. And so you think about the old approach is, here are the 10 principles to being a great leader, right? Kind of concept. And so they agreed we didn't like where it was going. And that was great. Yes, we all said that. Okay, great. So then they were about to go, well, here are the 20 new, basically, rules, principles, ways to think as a leader. And I just challenged them in that moment and said, what is stopping from in 5 years' time, I reckon probably a year's time, 20 years' time, 50, whatever, 100 years' time, someone looks at this and goes, oh my goodness, why did they put those in? Because we only make those rules, principles, whatever, boundaries, you name it, through the lens of what we know. And this is what I challenged them. I said, what if we did like the 20 lenses in which to ask more effective questions as leaders across the globe? So what I mean by that is, instead of me presuming I know what you want, Ronsley, where you believe we should go and the decisions you want to make, I ask a question that then starts that awareness that we need to bring to the table. They just looked at me like deer in spotlights, it was just too far for them to even comprehend. But it is moments like that that I believe we have to start thinking, how can we innovate different ways at a table in which we will bring a different solution? Because I know for me, with children, I want to make sure I'm leaving behind it for the generations and the generations to come, a platform where, one, they have a voice, but they're able to use that voice for good.
Yeah. As a population, what are the things that you disagree with? What are the things that you're seeing that you're kind of like, can we disagree out loud? Are you brushing up against the line with your disagreement? Or is it just disagreement where there's a bunch of people already in that same pool disagreeing with you?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. And I think that's what I have noticed, is that there's actually a willingness for people to be okay that if you've got different beliefs or different thoughts or insights around things. I think the hardest thing is less about disagreeing right at this moment. If I show up unapologetically in all that I do, what does that actually look like? And I think the pushback that I got when I asked myself that question was this: I don't want to show up unapologetically and then you think that I think I'm so smart and you're dumb and you shouldn't, that is so not what I want, right? Yet I can tell you in the past, if I bring my smartness, you should see how some people respond or react to that, right? If I stand strong in what I believe, even if my, say, spiritual belief is different, it's okay to be different in other ways. But if I have a spiritual belief that it's different, that's often makes the other person feel uncomfortable. And so that's not a right at the table. And that is not always easy either. And I think the last piece of that is, if I stand up unapologetically and I do crazy things like I'm doing at the moment, which is one of my personal goals physically, because I know there's a correlation between how we show up physically to the output in which we play in the business world.
One of the things that I really want to do is create change around conversations that you don't agree with. And that's a reason for my posts, especially like that. And my next post was something along the lines of, you're supposed to disagree with me. Doesn't mean you're right. Doesn't mean I'm right.
Yeah.
And that's the idea here is that we're in a position right now where we're trying to communicate, but we're only trying to communicate in a place where it's safe to communicate, as opposed to we need to communicate so that we can better refine our arguments. That's my version of communication. I communicate because I want to refine my version of an argument, because I don't think I'm right, just like you. Definitely don't think I'm right, but I want to open up the conversation for everyone to have their say, bad, ugly. So I'm going to wind up on this question. Change. What is your idea on how we can enact change on the planet? Because we all feel like we want to make an impact, especially when you get to that top of the mountain and realize, oh, that's the bottom of the next mountain. What's the way that we can collaboratively affect change?
So there's a woman called Lynn McTaggart. I was very blessed to have her on the podcast. And she did a lot of research into something that she eventually ended up calling the power of 8. And basically through a lot of scientific research and studies with like tenured scientists, they basically extrapolated that when 8 people hold an idea, the fiber of reality can change. It's very, very fascinating work. But ultimately, time after time, whether it was the growing rate of a plant or whether it was peace in a particular region of the world, when 8 people held an idea, something happened. For many years, I was in a group that met every Wednesday, and we would hold different intentions for ourselves and for each other around the same. And miracles, I literally witnessed miracles happen. It doesn't require thousands of people to create change. It requires enough people to come together in groups as small as 8, focusing on the solution, focusing on the outcome that we want, focusing on what we want to see happen and not what we don't want, not what we're tired of, not what we're trying to run away from, because that's what we're pouring energy into. If enough of us recognize that these little hubs of elevated consciousness can be the seeds that are the change, something good's going to happen on this planet.
When you think about this collaborative effort, because it has to be collaborative, like as much as it hurts, and as much as we'd love for someone to lose for us to win, we've got to like have a collaborative effort to make these ideas heard. Do you have some sort of a starting point that you could educate us on? I mean, comedy being something that lightens the idea or message that it probably gets to people. I mean, for us all trying to get our message across, however hard it might be to hear, is there a way that we can do that in a collaborative fashion?
That's a good point. On this particular issue, it's so important to be collaborative, to find people who do represent that particular point of view. Like there's that great maxim, which is like nothing about us without us. And that is so important. You've got to do this hand in hand with First Nations people. Like FES, I was so happy that, I had some great prominent, funny Black comedians join us and academics join us on team. So we could all do it together. And it was co-led by a wonderful creative director who I won't name, they could name themselves later because I don't think we'll get them in trouble. So, it was just like, that was a real thrill to log on 3 days a week, to have Zoom meetings with these folks and just kind of distill what they were saying into great bits of content, and then like kind of walk hand in hand and try and do all this together. That was a real thrill. And it was so great to go the week before we started the campaign, to go to the Torres Strait with other great First Nations comedians and have them basically run Irrational Fear, run the podcast. And that was really a real joy to kind of set that platform up. We performed to like 60 people in a bowls club on Thursday Island, and just spoke about First Nations kind of points of view on Australia. And that was amazing, very special. So yeah, I think people need to, when they think about collaboration, particularly when they're trying to represent any kind of group, nothing about us without us is a really great point to start. So don't even think about trying to speak from an area that isn't in your own experience without having someone with you to kind of help you, because that's just a cool, man. When you come into thinking about collaboration and storytelling like this, that is a great place to start.
Thank you so much for listening. Listen to the back catalog of over 300 episodes by going to wearepodcast.com. If you're looking for something specific, let the We Are Podcast team point you in the right direction. Send us an email on podcast@wearepodcast.com. Also, if you know a business owner who has a podcast, ask them to listen. Share an episode with them. The conversations here are going to save them lots of trial, error, time, and money. Until next week, much love.